Welcome to JMR Talks. Today we will discuss about pandemic leadership. Pandemic, when we say it refers to some kind of infectious disease which will spread fast. But when we are talking about pandemic leadership, we are referring to what we call some uncertain times during which how the leaders will what we call conduct themselves or what we call behave ourselves. There was a time we spoke about intelligent quotient. Those who are having higher intelligent quotient expected to be good and all that. From IQ, we move to what we call EQ, emotional quotient. That means trying to understand our emotions and that of emotions of others for better management. From EQ, we move to what we call SQ, the spiritual quotient. That is taking care of oppressed, suppressed sections of the society or following a policy of empathy or what we call compassion. But today, in a VUCA world, and especially when we are facing times like what we call COVID, one quotient that is required or the need of the hour is adversity quotient or uncertainty capability. Now we need what we call leaders, who will say goodbye to what we call the fixed mindset and the growth mindset, rather focus on fluid mindset. What is so special about fluid mindset? Leaders, who have fluid mindset, they follow, they practice what we call flexibility, and they try to what we call focus on improvement. Now, why we should talk about pandemic leadership? In fact, we know that leaders as such, they are the ones who inspire their people to do their best, right? But when we look at most of the numerous psychological studies that I've done so far, they focused on impact of leadership only on employee motivation or employee productivity. For the first time, Leo Yao and their team, they focused on the impact of leadership on work-life balance and spouse well-being. When someone is good on the family front, naturally he is expected to be good on the office front also. So they looked at both authoritarian style of leadership and the benefitive style of leadership. Now, when the leaders were following authoritarian leadership, there was no work-life balance, and there were family conflicts. The spouse well-being was not good. Spouses were not that happy. On the other hand, people working under benevolent leadership, they had work-life balance, and the spouse very much satisfied, and spouse well-being also was very good. In the case of authoritarian leadership style, when the spouse is also working, the impact was more severe. So, leaders need to monitor their style. Rebecca Zaka and Darren Ravel, they suggested a 6 strategies to learn and to evolve and to navigate crisis like COVID, so that our nations will come out with flying colors. So what are those 6 strategies? Number one, embrace discomfort of not knowing. Some of us are under the impression that we must know everything. No, it's not necessary or not possible. So let's move it from know it all to learn it all mindset. Let's be open to learn and improve. Number two, complicated and complex challenges. We must make a difference between these two. Complicated, for example, some of us might find it very difficult to file a income tax return. So we can always take the help of chartered accountants. But there are some complex issues or complex challenges, like the government policy or the climate policy as such. So are we prepared or ready to handling complex issues? The third one is let go of perfectionism. Few leaders are obsessed with perfectionism. But instead of focusing on perfectionism, let's focus on improving, progressing. In fact, I'll say that there's one soft skill which was hitherto neglected or not emphasized, is that of improving. The time is to improve the way we perceive the things, the way we manage the things, the way we conduct our relationships, etc., etc. Next, resist oversimplification. Let us not try to oversimplify or come up with quick solutions as such. Let us look at the issue in the larger perspective and look for solutions. Next one is, don't go it alone. Some of you must have seen Dhanush movie Raghuvaran B.Tech. In the movie, when the Dhanush faces a problem in completing the construction, because when the villain wins away all his workers, what does he do? He makes use of his network through social media. takes the help of what call his fellow engineers and all that. Next, zoom out. Let's not get stuck with our narrow perspective. Like for example, instead of being in the what call four walls of a room, let's come onto the balcony. Zoom out. Look the things in the broad perspective. When we are talking about what called pandemic leadership or leadership during uncertain times, a question naturally arises as to how good leadership looks like. So in this regard, let's look at what called two people. One, Adam Silver, Commissioner of National Basketball Association, and second, New Zealand Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. Adam Silver, the moment what called he could foresee about what called COVID, he suspended the what called league match. This was much before when World Health Organization recognized COVID on March 11th. In fact, when his players were provided treatment for this COVID and all that, the mayor criticized that when people are struggling to get tested, these papers are what advantageous lot. The way Adam Silver replied, he said, yes, I think each and everyone has to be provided the facility for testing as such. Now look at what New Zealand Prime Minister. She adopted a 4-level alert system. The kind of system normally they follow for what 5 risks. The first one is what prepare. On March 21st, she gave a 8-minute televised statements, asking the people to what be ready. Second, reduce. By imposing some travel restrictions and all that, she tried to reduce or mitigate the impact of COVID. Third, restricting the what contacts between the people, and as a last resort, she has imposed what lockdown. Now this is how what she prepared her people with the policy of involve, inform, and inspire with her transparent what leadership style, whereby people were what willing to what participate. Look at what her famous advice to the people, please be strong, be kind, and unite against what COVID-19. So when we look at these two leaders who did extremely well during the COVID times, we find that leaders need to act with urgency. There's no what space for postponement. Number 2, communicating with what transparency. My guru, Professor Ranjan Das from IIM Calcutta, used to tell me, Jagan, communication is the hallmark of management. No communication, no management. So in uncertain times, you need to communicate with transparency. I am reminded of what called Satyam Saga, during which the leadership ensured that periodical communication goes to the people and all that. The third, respond productively to what called missteps. There is a saying, to err is what called human and to forgive is what divine. We all commit what called mistakes, but the beauty lies in what called realizing them and trying to what called improve and trying to what called correct themselves for such. Next one is engage in constant updating. Yes, we need to follow the policy of learn, unlearn, and whatever relearn as such. Let's not forget one thing: obsolete technology is dangerous, but obsolete human resources is disastrous. So, to face what called uncertain times like what called COVID, etc., what is that leaders need to do? Number 1, they need network. Network matters. Don't be under the impression that you need to have all the answers. No. It's okay to what called practice or display vulnerability. In fact, when you demonstrate vulnerability, you start building what called excellent culture of what called psychological safety, where when people feel, okay, it's okay not to have all the answers. Next, act with urgency. In uncertain times, you must what call act. I am reminded of a what call Sholay dialogue. Loha garam hai, hathoda maro. The next one is communicate with transparency. Communication is a hallmark of management. But when we communicate, are we what call creating value, communicating value, and delivering value? And there lies what call the importance of what call transparency. And last but not the least is, let's what call respond productively to what call mistakes. Yes, some mistakes will happen, but how we respond to them? Are we open to what call learn or call improve? That's what call matters. So in conclusion, I will say that when the leaders are what call open, they follow what call fluid mindset with focus on flexibility and willingness to improve. Definitely, they can what call steer the organizations through crises like COVID, successfully. Thank you.